Welcome to Still Creative. My name is Eric Averitz, and my guest is Mike Butler. Mike has over 20 years of experience in financial services and consulting, serving in roles that include Director of Business Intelligence, Application Strategy Manager, and Chief Technology Innovation Officer. He's currently the Senior Director of Data Delivery at One America Financial. Mike thrives on working collaboratively with teams to leverage technology and data for business transformation and innovation. He earned a degree in Management Information Systems and an MBA from Ball State University. Mike has also pursued further studies in predictive analytics and innovation at Northwestern and Purdue Universities. He earned the IBJ CTO of the Year Award in 2017 and the Award of Achievement from the Miller College of Business in 2020. Mike, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Yeah, excited to be here. This will be fun.
Very much so. So you've mentioned that your success is connected to being a continual learner and to really being a person who has an innovation mindset. Can you tell us what you mean by an innovation mindset?
Yeah, so to me, when I think about people who are or who have innovative mindsets, they are people that they're continually trying to learn. They're continually trying to understand their environment, and they're willing to try new things. And so when I think about at least my mindset of how I like to, when I put myself into that innovation mode, those are kind of the things that flow together for me.
Excellent. So thank you for sharing that, and the innovation or innovative mindset that you have has led you to an area that I want to ask you about, and that was research you did on 10 common cognitive biases that leaders face. And so before we get into the details there, can you just share generally why that topic was of interest to you?
I can. So a lot of my background is technology and data and analytics and things like that. And one of the things I got really interested in is when you start to get into machine learning, you start to get into predicting stuff, you start to get into understanding patterns. You start to ask yourself questions like, how was this data collected? Like, how do I know there's not something wrong with the data I've collected that I'm trying to use to generate an outcome or something like that? And so couple that with my dad's a cognitive psychologist. So I spent the majority of the first 18 years of my life being experimented on. Well, he tried new things with us, going to different classes. So for me, doing some of this research, I got really interested in as I would watch I'd work on data projects, I'd watch my team doing things, and I'd start to wonder, well, what's stopping us? What's inhibiting our ability to move forward or to collaborate or something like that? So it's a couple factors, some family, some just personal interest, but I enjoy it, and it drives me to do research in it. It drives me to to try new things and work with people in different ways.
Excellent. So as we talked about having this conversation today, one of the things that I'm interested in, and you referenced it there, but those things that keep us from being as fully creative or innovative as we could be, whether that's individually or collectively as teams, those things that cause people to stop short. And can you share the example that you shared with me about the cybersecurity team member who really went from being overly risk focused to ultimately becoming an enthusiastic participant in the creative process?
Let me share a little bit about some work I did with one of the cybersecurity engineers, where originally he wasn't a fan of what we were trying to do, and then we brought him forward. And this is back in the vein of trying to get people to move from a sense-making mode all the way up through like a creative problem-solving and an innovation mode. And so cybersecurity is a really hard role. Like, there's a lot of stuff those guys are doing. There's a lot of complexity in the environment, and there's a lot of their problem solving sometimes is really kind of it can get really routine. There's a thing that happens, you take an action. There's a thing that happens, you take an action. One of the things that we wanted to look at was, well, if you think about it, the problem is that like cybersecurity teams are completely overwhelmed, and so we wanted to sit down with this individual, and we wanted to look for different ways that we could help them solve problems and look at their problems in different ways. And so early on, they weren't. It was kind of a mindset of, no, you guys just don't understand what I do. This is it's not the type of work you do. It's not what you think it is. And as we engaged him in our process and we brought him into it, showed him what we were doing, and walked through different scenarios, brought the brainstorm together. He, over the course of several weeks, really started to become really engaged, very engaged in the process. And so you could really see the shift from, as he went from not thinking we could do the things that we could do, all the way into, he's in full-on creative problem-solving mode. He is in the room with us. System 2 is engaged. He's thinking about stuff in different ways. And I think that's the kind of thing that we would look for when we were trying to bring people forward into that creative problem-solving mode.
So what do you think was the key in this example or generally in other examples that come to mind when you see movement in individuals along that spectrum to become more flexible, more innovative? So there's two terms that you might find interesting. So one is called like cognitive rigidity, and another one's called, well, you could say, and then cognitive like plasticity. And so generally what you're looking for is like when you're trying to get people into the problem-solving state, in that creative state, where you're looking for situations in which those people are, if they're in like this rigid state, people are using these quick reactions and they're looking at their environment in the same way. When I've worked with those teams, one of the things we look for is we try to put people into the frame of mind of, we need to go into a problem-solving, kind of a creative problem-solving mode, and not so much this isn't going to work, or we can't do that, or kind of a rapid response kind of situation. So you help them with, is it processes that help make that shift? So I think of it from the standpoint of a business analyst type of process that might be the devil's advocate role, and knowing that the problem that's being worked on has, if the wrong decision is made, the cost is high enough that it makes sense to invest time in making sure the right decision is made. And so having someone in the group play the role of devil's advocate would be a process that would help to make that shift. That's perfect, actually. So in concept, let me explain dual processing theory and the reason that works, what you just went through. So there's a concept in psychology called, this guy named Daniel Kahneman came out with a theory called dual processing theory. And dual processing theory essentially is, so you have two kind of modes in your brain. And the first mode is a rapid response mode. It's like RAM, it's hot memory, it's things that you can do really fast. When you go and drive a car, you're using kind of your system 1. System 1 is it's your ability to do fight or flight response. It's your ability to just have a conversation quickly, all that kind of stuff. System 2 is your deep thinking mode. It's your, I'm really going to think about this problem. I'm going to try to understand what I'm hearing. I'm gonna try to think differently. So some of what we're going to talk about today, when we talk about like cognitive biases, those exist in that system 1 state. It's your RAM. It's your quick memory. It's your quick response kind of environment. So one of the things we'll do is we try to get people to move into that system 2 mode, especially when you want to do like creative problem solving, or you want to be creative. And some people, in some situations, there's people that do it more naturally. There's people that don't, and because the reality is everybody's creative. It's just a function of how do you go into that system 2 state, and how do you when you want to be creative, and how do you go away from system 1. Now, there are situations where system 1 is an amazing system and you don't want to try to go into system 2. Yeah, that's an interesting thing too, like why we have these biases, and what the healthy side of what they do. Yeah, well, and it's pretty interesting if you think about it. Like system 1 is trying to create shortcuts it's an energy conservation thought process. You're trying to conserve energy. So system 1 is trying to say, hey, your brain, it does not have infinite energy. So if I can make quick, short decisions and help you with these mental shortcuts,
then great. So like sports is a really good example. Like a lot of sports, like we talk about muscle memory, you talk about things like that. That's what you want. You're trying to get to a point where you don't really have to do a lot of thinking to shoot the ball. You know how to take a shot at this point. I mean, if you had to get out there on the court and then, you had to do a lot of deep thought to be able to take a shot, you're going to lose.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And so that if we look at from the standpoint of leaders, it's the reason why it's important to have just awareness of these two systems and know when you are using system one and when you are using system two and applying them to the right scenarios.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think, leaders specifically, I think it's important to know, really be aware of two areas. So the first area is in yourself, is when you are in a system one state and you are potentially creating a risk because you're in a state and you're creating a bias or something like that because of your belief or something like that. And you're not. There's a term called debiasing where you try to reduce that bias that you have. And then the second part is when you can see it in others, and that probably for me is you have to see it in yourself first, and then when you can see it in others, you can start to come up with ways to try to debias that. Like as an example, we were doing some estimating the other day, product estimation, and what happens in an estimation process is the first person to kind of give a number, like, I think it's going to be 8 hours or something like that. There's a bias called the anchoring effect, and that's what it is. You're essentially looking at an estimate. The first person that gives a number, your brain anchors to that number, and now it's a system one action. You ask everyone else, what does anyone else think differently? Most people are going to anchor around that, let's say it was 8 hours, that 8 hour number. They might say 10, they might say 6. So sometimes what you'll have people do from a debiasing technique of that one, like if it's estimation, you'll have people independently estimate and you bring it together and then you look at like these big variances and you talk about it.
Yes.
You get the people to collaborate. So there's a number of techniques or like situations like that. So people do this. I think if you're really good with different techniques, you know how to get people to collaborate in different ways, or how to like fix an estimation issue or something like that. But some of what you're doing it for, like, and that's what I got interested in. I'm like, well, why do I have to do that? Like, why can't I just put people in a room and get them to all estimate independently? And then you start to realize you're like, oh, yes. System one, system two.
Yes, anchoring. I remember reading about anchoring, and it was probably in Thinking Fast and Slow. The example that sticks with me, menu items and the highest price item on a restaurant menu is often there so that the second highest priced item on the menu is not seen as so expensive. And so a lot of people will buy that second one because relative to the really expensive entree, this one's not that bad. So anchoring is what that is.
That's the perfect example. Example. And in the workplace, we talk about, you can see that same anchoring effect, and you can also, when you recognize it too, and you see it like in sales, you might see it, or as a manager or as a leader, you might see that. And part of what you're trying to do is to get people to think a little bit differently, like at the moment that it happens.
Yes.
One of the techniques is actually to think about a debiasing technique for anchoring would be to, like, if you see a number, let's say you got a contract, it's $1 million, and then you pull up another contract and you're working on a bunch of stuff, and all of a sudden that other contract, you just worked on one that's $1 million, like this one doesn't seem that big. Well, one of the things they tell you to do is just think about some other numbers. Look up a score from last night, like a basketball score, baseball, whatever, It doesn't matter. Look at that and then go look at that number. Give yourself a couple minutes, and that will actually help you debias from that situation.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting, and I've tried it when I've been working on something like independently, and I don't know if it works. I think it works, but it's pretty interesting.
It is interesting that it doesn't even have to be related.
Mm-mm.
The numbers don't have to be related.
No, not at all.
Well, let's talk about some specific examples. And so the first one I'll ask you about is overconfidence. Can we build on that one a little bit?
Overconfidence is a really interesting one. So it is what it sounds like, right? It's overconfidence bias is essentially you are overconfident. Your belief that what you think is more right than what everyone else would think. And overconfidence bias, one of the things we see with overconfidence bias in some of the research I did, and I found this really interesting, there are situations where overconfidence bias was found, like in CEOs, certain CEOs, they found that having an overconfidence bias was showing up to correlate to their company's performance, especially their company's performance in terms of innovation. They were highly innovative companies. The problem is there's not the opposite side of that research doesn't exist.
Okay.
Like, so you don't really know, like, people that maybe were overconfident and failed.
Right.
You're not really sure. So I don't know if some of that research that I read, I don't know if what the outcome is, well, there's not enough of a sample on the other side of this, or if it's something else. But overconfidence bias shows up, I think, in a lot of leaders, but in certain personality types, you're going to get more of it. So individuals that are more assertive, probably more extroverted, things like that, you're going to tend to see more overconfidence bias. I think the key there is, again, it's recognizing it in yourself. Is that a situation you're in, especially if you're working with a team and you're trying to understand a problem and you have an idea on a solution and you want to drive a direction. A lot of times what you have to do is get people to give you perspective. Like, where's this level of confidence coming from that you've got? Why is it you believe what you think is the right thing to do? And some people say seek research around the opposite of that. Go find out if what you're trying to do, see if you can come up with, a different idea or a different perspective, and then relook at what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Yes, that makes me think of an approach to meetings. One of my previous guest on Still Creative talked about farming for dissent and using that as an approach to meetings, and just to be sure that you were surfacing those, that different perspective. So as we have awareness of these biases, then we can then go to the next step of when it's relevant, that it's important to invest more time in these debiasing techniques. So let's talk about a different one, confirmation.
Yeah. And these two are pretty closely related. So confirmation bias, again, I like this one too, because it's what it sounds like. It's so your confirmation bias is like, you have a theory, and you seek to confirm that theory. So, like, an example I give people, software selection is a really good example. So you're looking at, let's say you're trying to decide between Microsoft Teams and Zoom or something like that. And what you do is you ask a couple people and they go, "Oh, we use Teams." And you say, "Well, that's right. That's good, because that's what I wanted." And what you do then is you say, "Well, everyone uses Teams, so we should use Teams too." Right. I figured it out, right? I've solved the problem. And what you don't know is, well, why? Like, are you sure that's what you should use? And maybe it is. Maybe it doesn't matter in that sense. But when we think about confirmation bias, and this is actually pretty prevalent in business today, I think it's one of the probably the larger problems in business and in the science communities, is that people these days seek to confirm their own beliefs rather than farm for dissent, find the opposite, seek the antithesis of what you're actually thinking about. And in fact, in most scientific research, you're supposed to try to disprove your theory. Can you find a way to disprove what you're actually thinking? Because if you can't, then there's a problem. The probability goes way up that's an accurate theory. And so this confirmation bias, when I think about it in business, and I think about the criticality of think projects where people are kicking off these multi-million-dollar projects, the question becomes, like, what have you done to farm for dissent, to find the opposite or a different path, and have you done the appropriate things? And so this one's the same. This one's knowing that it's going on is a big component of the debiasing technique, training people around it, and then again, getting different perspectives and then seeking alternatives is a really good way to try to debias the environment.
Okay, that's good. And just connecting to my world in sales, I could certainly think of examples of where overconfidence and thinking about we call it having the happy years, and in terms of an opportunity that you're working on and the likelihood that you're going to bring in this new client, but there are things that we can look at there to help with that overconfidence piece. That's where something like having a budget conversation and understanding if something is not just a problem but also a priority in terms of there being budget available to solve that problem. Or it could be something simple like a client's willingness to schedule a follow-up meeting with you and put you on their calendar. We can walk out of a meeting thinking it went really well, but if we didn't get a next meeting, if we didn't ask for one, then it might not have gone as well as we thought.
Right, exactly.
Whereas if we ask for the next meeting and the client was willing to put it on the schedule, then that gives us some confirmation that helps again with this overconfidence element of sales. Confirmation, I think of an example of someone starting a small business. That to me feels like one that really thinking about that element of confirmation, and someone that would ask their friends and family if they should start this business,
right,
because they have a skill set that's relevant. They're likely to hear a lot of yeses, and you'd be great at that. But there's so much that needs to be considered, especially limited budget, kind of a decision. So I think anyone that's considering starting a business venture, being aware of that confirmation bias could be key.
Yeah, I think too, a decision like when to sell your business. I was talking to my dad's and my brother and some others have done small businesses and startups. And that's a conversation we've had is they'll sometimes call me because when I don't have any skin in the game, and it's because it's an independent perspective, but then they'll also seek other people, because sometimes you ask a family member and they're like, oh yeah, no, don't sell or whatever it is. But I think, and my dad and I were talking about this. Like he had this, he didn't want to sell his business, because he keeps believing in the growth. So he's got these combined too. So you can have an overconfidence bias. You can see confirmation bias start to slip in there because he's like, well, I don't want to sell right now, and I can really see, this is where we're going to be here in a couple years, and we've got a growth plan, and we're going to do all these things. And you're like, yeah, but that market's like changing. Have you looked at what's happening with the website markets and things like that?
Right.
So those, what I think what starts to get really interesting is when you start to think about some of the combinations of these biases because a lot of times it's not just one bias that's occurring. I mean, it's all these shortcuts that your brain has. And so sometimes if you really sit down and think about it, you're like, oh, wow, I was probably under the effect of like 4 or 5 different ones. I was overconfident in my ability to negotiate. I had an anchoring bias.
Right.
And then I didn't ask anyone what they thought about the price. I just assumed that what I was going after was right.
Right.
We went from there. So it's pretty interesting.
It is interesting. And it is with awareness of it, you could start to pretty quickly identify these things happening, which is great, which makes this conversation pretty actionable, I think, for folks listening to this. I want to ask you about one more as we start to wrap up here, but the fundamental attribution error.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so fundamental attribution error, I'll see if I say this right. Fundamental attribution error is when you attribute one person's actions to their own, one person's actions to something that's under their control, but your own actions to external factors. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have someone that came late to a meeting, and you say, well, they just don't pay attention to their calendar or something like that, and then you the rest of the day were late to all your meetings, because but that was that wasn't your fault. You were in other meetings and you couldn't get to your next meeting or whatever it was. I saw this. I had an experience once where I had someone fall asleep at the office, and your first thought is, man, are they lazy? Like, why are they just falling asleep? They don't have any work to do. But like, if you take a step back and like think about it for a second, right? System 2 engagement, and you're like, oh wait, no, they just had a newborn. They're probably not sleeping at all. This isn't their fault. And where maybe my own experience, like I think the longest I worked was like a 70-some hour shift when we had a big issue going on.
Wow. And
of course, like cognitively, I'm not functioning at that point. I think I fell asleep at my desk for a little while, which is completely normal if you've been awake that long. But at that point, I might have been, if I was thinking about that moment, I would have been like, well, that was outside of my control.
Right.
Where that person, that's the same situation for them. They haven't been sleeping. So fundamental attribution errors, I think from a leadership perspective, is one that's really important because that can come into, like if you think about review time and when you do performance evaluations and things like that, sometimes people will attribute something to someone that really was not in their control, but then when they reflect back on themselves, they think, oh no, well, I've done that, but it's not really my fault. So
yes, and that's a performance review is a a great example of a time where awareness of this potential for a fundamental attribution error comes into play in a really meaningful way for people. I think for me, as I think about fundamental attribution error, I think just generally, and you've said it a few times, this ability to take a step back. And so linking to Still Creative in the name of the podcast, and the still is that element of stillness, which you could also think of as mindfulness or awareness. And so for me personally, that's been part of the journey of being more creative, or as you said earlier, we're all creative. It's just, how much of it are we unlocking and being able to share with the world. But I think of that mindfulness piece is so critical as it relates to fundamental attribution error. And in that moment, when you have that initial system one reaction related to someone, to be able to just shift to what's their perspective on things.
Yeah.
Right.
I love you using the terminology. So that's that's fantastic. And two, to tie it in with the brand here, with being still, like, so it turns out, like, most of these biases we've been talking about today, there's two things you can do in most situations. So the first one is just be aware. If you're aware of these types of things, your brain is going to, and by the way, you can't control this, your brain's just going to do it. But training and awareness really helps. The second thing, and the really powerful thing, is to if you're in one of those situations, the first thing it takes about 2 seconds. So you need to stop and just take a deep breath and think for about 2 seconds or longer. But that moment of 2 seconds of stillness is actually the next thing that really helps, and that's actually how long it takes for System 2 to kind of engage. And so if you're trying to get it to engage, and the interesting thing that happens, like, between System 1 and System 2, when System 2 engages, like, your pupils will dilate a little bit. They actually have measured this, and they can see these things happen. And so in that moment, if you give yourself, a couple seconds, just kind of think for a minute, engage that System 2, you have this moment of stillness, and then your body kind of reacts and lets you go into that kind of problem-solving mode.
Excellent. And how do you see, like, that way of being, that way of carrying yourself relative to not taking those 2 seconds? Like, I always think that's, as I've thought about how being still and having more of a mindfulness mindset, if you will, it's just a better way of going about doing what I do, and generally just a better way to be, a positive teammate and contribute to the organization and those kind of things. Your thoughts on that?
I think you're right. So it's one I actually have to work at really hard, because I tend to like to talk. I tend to this is like self-actualization moment, right? And I tend to like to talk. I tend to my System 1 engages too much, and it's probably why I find the research so interesting, because I'm constantly telling myself, like, think about that differently. Hold on a second. Like, try to engage this differently. And so I think, like, one of the things I think I can do as a leader and as a teammate and things like that is being aware of some of these when I see a team struggling with something, or I see myself, like, acting in a certain way. I try to take that minute and sit back, breathe for a second, take a break, whatever it takes to kind of debias the situation so that I can help us move forward. Because I really do think good problem solving, if you think about it, you need that. You're going to have to engage System 2. You need a moment of stillness to kind of get there. And if you want a group of people to all have System 2 engaged versus, someone shut down or someone, reacting to something, it's going to take a little bit of work, and you're going to have to give everyone that time. So I'm a huge fan of what you're saying, and I'm still trying to get better at it.
Yes, I am as well. It's a work in progress and probably a lifelong journey, but a lot of benefits and from it. So, Mike, thank you.
Yeah.
This has been great. We appreciate you sharing from your research and your professional experience, and so appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks, Eric.